whole question of, whether they can coexist or not is really not a question. To the women in the audience, certainly the position is accepted. But I think I would take off from the last statement that Fatima made and say that exactly, if the question of agency or choice was there and available to women to make that kind of a decision, then I would accept the position that Germaine Greer made. But in these societies or in the kind of places we are talking about, when there is no agency for a woman, and she is wearing that burqa not because she has a choice to do so, but because she is mandated, I think there is the question. And I haven't received an answer to that.
The problem with, I agree with you, that we can't be sure that the women who are wearing the burqa are doing so as a choice that they themselves have made. But we can't be sure that the opposite is true either, especially when in England we have the phenomenon of English girls now adopting the burqa and claiming to find peace and happiness within its folds. This is maybe surprising, although it's probably less surprising to me than to other people. The problem is that you cannot decide that someone else is oppressed and then go up and strip from them the insignia of their oppression. When this happened in Iran, because the Shah was responding to pressure from the United States, the immediate result for many women when they were being stripped of the chador in the street was that they never went out of the house again, because it was part of their view of who they were that they were chador-wearing women. You cannot make that decision for women without infantilizing them, without making them infants. The same thing happens, ironically, of course, with the bikini. They both do the same job from that point of view. If you assume that you can liberate a woman by removing the insignia that you have identified as meaning that she's oppressed, you're simply wrong. These are battles that people have to fight for themselves. As I said, when these mechanisms have lost their social utility, they will simply wither away. Women were veiled in the West in the Middle Ages. A married woman covered her head, first of all with a wimple, and then with a veil, like the double veiling that you find in the Gulf. It withered away. Women began to wear hats, then they wore caps, then they wore bonnets, and now they're bareheaded, except when it's cold. One of these days, they may decide to start wearing things on their heads again. It's really interesting to me to think about things like the turban as a veil in waiting. The turban is an immensely important symbol for Sikhs. Sikhs fought to protect it in Britain when they first came to Britain in numbers, and they won. They won the right to wear the turban when they were working on the buses and on the trains and so on. But women are not able to get the same rights for wearing hijab. And there are some practical reasons for that, and there are not from other points of view, such as that it impedes their vision. The latest thing to happen is that a British Muslim, Lord Ahmed, has identified the full-face veil as a sign of resistance, which is one of the points that Fatima made. As a sign of resistance, it interests me very much. It's saying, not only am I not a member of the dominant culture, I despise it, I disapprove of it, I reject it. And as a battling feminist myself, I have to accept that as a statement that is of significance to me. This battle for the right to hide my face becomes as important as the battle for the right to show your face. But it can't be fought by anyone but the agent herself.
And I think maybe it's also good to note that this idea of the burqa or the veil as resistance doesn't start now. I mean, this is not a post-9/11 phenomena. This was happening in Algeria at the height of the French colonial occupation. It was a manner of opposition to the French. But I think also Turkey is an interesting example to the lady that asked the question. You know, Turkey you're not allowed to hold government office. You can't teach in a university. Your access is restricted by virtue of your covering your hair. And yet women in Turkey choose to do so. I mean, I think this is part of the issues, that we should have had a Turkish woman here to tell us about that. We should have had somebody who could speak to your question, because there are many women who do choose to wear the veil.
Don't you think the trend in the UK is worrying, that girls find themselves more liberated by wearing a burqa to hide themselves from the gaze of men? Is that saying that it's becoming worse, the oppression?
The women don't actually put it that way. They talk about being free from self-consciousness when they wear the veil. There's not a lot of this discussion because we very seldom even study the veil. It's an anthropological phenomenon, multi-layered, extremely important, and we know very, very little about it. And we do, strangely, associate it with women. I wouldn't say there were millions of English girls who were adopting the veil, but there is another phenomenon, which is of young women going out on a Saturday night, already half drunk because they have bought a vodka flatty from the supermarket, barely dressed at all, even in the depths of winter. And they will be helling around in the streets of towns like Nottingham, screaming and shouting and behaving in an extraordinary way. And then if guys actually look at them, there's hell to pay. And you think, well, what is going on here? I mean, this is a strange inverted battle of the sexes. And the outcome is nearly always self-destruction in some sense or another for the young woman who's put herself in the way of danger and very often gets what she's looking for. So the actual dialogue between the sexes in England at the moment is cacophony. It's impossible to understand what's being said between the sides. And wearing a burqa may be a very good way of just opting out of the whole thing. Just, I can't hear, I can't see.
Oh, I can't answer for English women or the phenomena, but I think, and again, I think the Barbies are fascinating. I think it's amazing to see the accessories that go with these Bratz dolls, for example, and they're all sort of garter belts and stiletto heels, and then you look at Fulla's accessories, and they're really quite wholesome. I mean, aside from the prayer mat, she's got a book bag, she's got a couple of books, she has tapes. It's a different sort of way of being a young girl, maybe, and who's to say that that's worse or better?
Maybe that's like what you were talking about, the most powerful force being Western marketing. Maybe that's a way of resisting that. They were talking about marketing for Islamic needs becoming
but this has always been my argument about segregation. As a feminist, I've been constantly in trouble for example, being a member of an all-women college. But what is interesting about that is that the women get a chance to develop all sorts of sides of their personality and not simply the one that's got to do with charm and getting a guy and all that kind of thing. So they have to run their own college, they have to do their own May ball, they actually have to decide their own affairs. And so it looks here as if what we're being told is that we are now able to develop independently, and we've got a doll to do it with. Frankly, I prefer the Chinese example because the Barbie store closed down in Beijing for lack of interest.
Oh, that's much better.
Okay, Ishan?
Why are we romanticizing the veil suddenly? I'm going to leave this session. Either I'm missing something. By the time I leave this session, the veil is going to be the most liberating document. I'll just share a 30-second incident. In Jeddah, 7 years ago, a friend's wife had to wear a burqa and change into a bikini when we went out to a club. And she hated both. She just wanted to be in a pant and a shirt.
Well, I don't think anyone is romanticizing the veil. I think it's pretty hard to romanticize the veil. I just think that with the way we look at the veil now has become one of one reaction. It's just shock and repulsion. Yet no one in this entire room has ever worn a burqa to go to work or worn a hijab to the office out of choice or otherwise. And I think you can't divorce the politics that come with the veil now, increasingly. And it seems to me that most of the voices you hear about the veil come from outside. They come from women who have nothing to do with the veil, from cultures where it's a new phenomena. But I don't think that's romantic. I mean, I really doubt any of us here, none of us, again, who wear the veil, would find anything romantic or inspiring about wearing it ourselves.
Actually, I'm going to tell you a story about veiling, which involves me. Because, in fact, the veil is much more universal than people think. The covering of the head to signify respect, It's pretty much like the covering of your legs to signify respect for the people you're with. I was in Sicily. It was about 6 months after my father died. I'd been unable to mourn him at the time because I was on location for the BBC. So I chose the moment of being in Sicily to wear lutto, to wear black from head to foot. And I was writing a piece for The Observer, and I needed to go to various tourist locations. And as usual, there were the guys hanging around, some of them hoping you'll buy them a square meal or whatever. And they wouldn't leave me alone, even though I was wearing lutto, literally from head to foot, except from neck to foot. And then I realized they didn't understand I had to cover my head. The minute I covered my head, they left me alone completely. Now, you could say that I was capitulating to oppression by those men, or you could say I was giving out the wrong visual signal. I was mixing up the visual language in that community. I was speaking Italian. I knew that was a different language I had to use. And suddenly I understood the gestural language that went with it. So it's all very well for me to turn it into an oppressive situation, but I was in their country and I was misreading their custom. So you will find that British girls coming to India can't understand why they can't wear, crop top and tight shorts, and they will object to the fact that they're causing consternation. But they ought not to be causing consternation. It's simple good manners. And it's important not to get overexcited about all of this. We haven't all got a duty to go about semi-naked.
This discussion in the morning is about power and patriarchy, I think. And to take it away from textile and ask the wider question, do you not think that women, it's time now for women like you, Ms. Greer, to create a political and economic agenda, an alternative to what capitalism, communism, market forces all have done, which is to spread patriarchy and have us here discussing bits of cloth?
I agree with you absolutely, but this, in my attempt to adumbrate a way forward, that's why I said we shouldn't still be negotiating these rapids. We should be thinking about what post-industrial society would really look like. There was a system once which is now regarded with derision. It was called socialism. It never got started. It was replaced by state capitalism in most of the countries of the world that call themselves socialist. So we never really tried cooperative systems. We never really tried sororal and fraternal organizations. Instead, we've accepted the corporation model, which has conquered the world. And it is a phallic structure. And it's one in which women have either got to conform to masculinist protocols and become more rapacious and crueler and more oppressive than their male counterparts, or they don't participate in it at all. For a while I was saying in Britain, what is there to hate about a recession? It's wonderful. We're going to have to get back to survival, which is the women's greatest skill. Let's go for it. Let's welcome it. Let's watch the collapse of the banks. Let's pray every day for the collapse of the banks. What did we get instead? We got pillaged in order to keep these rotten banks afloat. They are still rotten. I live in hope. When they go, we will come out of the basements and we will run the show.
Hi, I'm Diane Michaud. I'm French. Nobody's perfect. My question is, you're very blessed, Mrs. Bhutto, to be able to come to Paris or France and wear a burqa. The question should be, why do you think I could go in any Muslim country in a bikini?
Yes, you could actually. You could go to Turkey in a bikini, you could go to Lebanon in a bikini, you could go to Jordan in a bikini, you could go to Syria in a bikini. You could go to a whole number of Muslim countries that would allow you to wear a swimsuit. I mean, I think this is the problem, is that we have this idea as Muslim countries just being entirely repressive women eaters. They're not. But I think the example for me is when France bans the burqa and says you cannot wear this in our schools, you cannot wear this in our offices, what it does is it removes access for those women who maybe have to wear a burqa, or who don't have a choice in wearing the burqa. They remove access for them. And now they can't go to French public schools, now they have to go to madrasas. It only exacerbates the problem. In the same way that, it's oppressive in the same way that Saudi Arabia is. When Saudi Arabia says, you cannot leave the house without a burqa, it isolates and alienates women. And I think banning it, whether it's in France or in Italy or in the Netherlands, will do that. It will only drive women further underground. It will remove exposure, it will remove any chance they have of creating multiplicity in their lives or multiple identities.
Germaine, do you want to add to that?
Well, all I would say about that is you can't actually wear a bikini in that many places in the West. I wouldn't try walking down Regent Street in a bikini. I think people might throw something over you for your own protection. You can wear bikini in segregated places in most countries of the world. And in fact, I can't understand why you have to do that. I mean, on the coast of the Adriatic, you can find places where you don't have to wear anything. And most people look a lot better in nothing than they do in a bikini.
One last question, and I'm going to take the privilege of that question. Sorry, guys. I want to know how much of the oppression of women comes from men and how much of it really comes from women. I think we are our toughest judges. I find that women pass the harshest judgments on other women. And how much of what we do for other women, actually, not for men.
Well, let me say this about that. Every feminist in the world knows that her toughest critic will be her mother. And the person who is least likely to be impressed by her arguments is her mother. And why is this? This is usually because the mother has done the hard yards. She has paid her dues. All her emotional eggs are in this basket, and you are not going to kick it over. And the further you go, the mother-in-law, and talking of the veil, how many families can you think of in which one generation always pulls the palu of her sari over her head when she goes to speak to a senior member of the family, and then the next generation doesn't bother so much, and maybe wears the sari tied a different way, and then the next generation refuses to wear a sari at all, and they all live under the same roof. This is really what we're dealing with. We're dealing with gradual changes in orientation and in expectation. So, I was faced for years with women who would say to me, I've been happily married, I'm fully realized in my marriage, I'm a fulfilled woman. And I couldn't say, well, why are you so obese and why do you bite your nails? Because it would have been simply rude. And I didn't say it, because I would generally think eventually something will happen and you'll see that actually you've probably been pretty seriously shortchanged. And when you find that out, I'm here, I'm listening. But until you find that out, I'm not going to destroy your satisfaction. So we all we're all living in this same odd situation. We've got to negotiate with men on the one hand, and we have to negotiate with the women in our own society on the other. And it's not easy, and we can get it seriously wrong, and we can hurt the people we love the most. It's life, it's what we do. But we really don't need people racing along and telling us that we A, must not wear the burqa, or B, that we must wear the burqa. That just adds another level of incomprehension and difficulty to a life that is already pretty travailed.
Fatima, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I suppose I think it comes down to individual states and individual hegemonies, and we as women also play a role in that. I mean, I think there's something dangerous to say for this idea of international feminism, that connects, that connects someone like Mukhtar Mai in Pakistan, who's a tremendous campaigner for women's rights, to Condoleezza Rice. I mean, just because they share a uterus doesn't make them the same person, doesn't make them engaged in the same battle. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a danger in placing all our oppression on outside forces, and certainly on ourselves. We you know, the tanks, I suppose, don't need to be rolling on the streets because they roll in our minds.